Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of MCS Science. We're talking about the digestive system. So, the process of digestion is fairly straightforward. Take in food, chew it up, swallow it, break it down into smaller molecules that can then be passed on to the cells of your body. Because most of the molecules in the food that we take in are too big to cross through cell membranes. So, we need to find a way to make them smaller, more simple, so they can enter into the cells so that our cells can do respiration and produce energy in the form of ATP. There are other aspects of this, pieces of these molecules that are not used for respiration. So it's not just energy. We use the fatty acids from the lipids to help generate new cell membranes. So if you get a cut or something and you need to repair damage to your cells, that material is there for the cells to use. There are actually four different kinds of biological molecule, although listed here there's only really truly three. Nucleic acids are left off of this because starches and carbohydrates are basically the same thing. Um, the first one is proteins, which are amino acid based, the building block. When cells need to make new proteins, they need free amino acids in order to build new proteins that do what they need them to do. Starches, they're really long, big chains of glucose that are really energy rich, and they're incredibly good in terms of energy. If you need a long term source of energy, starches are good for this. Lipids, fatty acids, uh, cell membranes are made up of lipid. So you need some fat in your diet in order to make sure that, if you damage a cell, you can replace it. Fatty acids are a big, big part of that. They're also a huge part in a lot of different kinds of steroids, a lot of different kinds of hormones. Carbohydrates, glucose is actually a carbohydrate, so are starches. So these are used very directly in the production of energy for our cells. There are four different steps in digestion. The first one is ingestion, so you're putting it in your mouth, chewing it, swallowing it. The minute you put a food in your mouth, digestion starts to happen. You're going to chew it, break it down, make it have more surface area. You're going to swallow it. While it's in your mouth, it's going to get infused with amylase, which is an enzyme that helps to start breakdown of starch. It's going to move down through your esophagus. It's going to get smashed up by the muscles of the esophagus and made into a mash. It's going to reach your stomach where more digestion starts to happen. After it is affected by the enzymes in your stomach and the acids, will enter your intestines where absorption really starts to pick up. The small intestine, the main goal of the small intestine, the main function of the small intestine is to pick up, the nutrients from the food, and then it's going to enter the large intestine where eventually it will be excreted. Two big types of digestion. The first one is mechanical, and that is the chewing and smashing parts that I just talked about. Your teeth, the point of your teeth is to break food down into smaller pieces, which increases its surface area. As that food is moving down through your esophagus, it is getting squeezed, and that also helps to increase the surface area to make it more of a kind of a goopy mess, I guess. When it enters your stomach, chemical digestion really starts to kick in. Although in your mouth, there is chemical digestion beginning because there's salivary amylase, which is an enzyme that starts to break down starch. Once the food enters your stomach, there's pepsin, which is a powerful enzyme that breaks down proteins. Amylase breaks down starches. Pepsin breaks down protein. It starts to break those things apart. But the stomach is also responsible for some physical mechanical digestion because it also churns that food up more as it enters the stomach itself. Teeth themselves, very, very well evolved to do what they do. You've got incisors in the front of your mouth, which are good for slicing off food. You've got molars in the back of your mouth, which are good for mashing food. Saliva itself has the enzyme amylase, as I just mentioned, which starts the digestion of starches. And your tongue is a really important muscle in the swallowing act to get the food down your throat, moving the direction it needs to go so that it can be broken down further as it moves into the rest of your digestive system. Esophagus, that's a tube from your throat down to your stomach. Uh, Through the process of peristalsis, which is a series of waves of squeezing, essentially, above the food as it's moving down, the esophagus will squeeze in kind of rings as it moves down the stomach, and it's kind of like squeezing out the last bit of toothpaste out of a toothpaste tube. You also have the at the top of the esophagus, you got the epiglottis, which will close over the epiglottis when you're breathing, so that you don't gag on your food, so that you don't want it going down into your trachea. That's not good. Um, Stomach itself, it's a large muscular organ that has an enzyme that it can secrete called pepsin, but it also secretes acids. And that's important because those acids don't work unless the environment of the stomach is very acidic, which is kind of important in a lot of ways. If you think about homeostasis and control of enzyme activity, you don't want that pepsin working when there's no food there because that can be a cause of ulcers. So the pepsin only works in a very acidic environment. Without that acidic environment, pepsin is not as effective. So it's a combination of the two things, that acid and the pepsin itself working together. But at the same time, the stomach is squeezing the food, making it increase the surface area and causing mixture of the acid, the pepsin with the food to increase that surface area to increase the breakdown of the proteins that are in the food. What comes out of the stomach is called chyme, and it's not a pretty sight. I'm not really going to put a picture up of that. That would be bad. Uh, the first section of the small intestine, the duodenum, is a place where lots of other enzymes are added. It's the first section of the small intestine, comes right out of the stomach. Um, you see a lot of digestion of carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins here. It's right below the liver. So here's where the enzymes from the liver and the pancreas can come in, and they tend to reduce the acidity of the chyme and help to increase the rate of digestion of the food that you have swallowed. Small intestine itself is really, everybody thinks of it as a smooth tube. But if you looked at it um, with a camera, you would think it looked very smooth. But the fact is, the the membranes that line the small intestine are actually lined with these tiny little protrusions, which are microscopic, called villi, that increase the surface area of the small intestine, which already has an enormous amount of surface area. But these villi, which are shown right over here, help to increase the amount of blood flow around the linings of the small intestine, which help to increase the absorption of nutrients through the digestive system into the circulatory system, which are really important in terms of transferring nutrients from the food, from the chyme, into the blood so that they can be moved around through the body. There's a lot of blood vessels in the small intestine that allow this to happen. Large intestine is mostly actually excretory. Um, the major function of the large intestine is to remove excess water from the nutrient, from the remaining chyme that enters it. Um, some of this still, I mean, there's a little bit of nutrient left here, but not very much usually. Large intestine has bacteria that help to break that down, mostly E. coli. When the large intestine is doing its job, removing just the right amount of water, removing, you know, all of that, and again creating feces that are solid and not terribly liquid. But sometimes that doesn't work, and it's as a result you end up with diarrhea. If you have too much water, if you don't have enough water, you have constipation. Obviously both can be inconvenient. um, it just depends on the situation. And then the last part of this is the rectum. The rectum itself is the lowest part of the large intestine, where fecal material will wait until there's enough of it so that you can actually go to the bathroom. Basically, you poop, and when you poop, there's a muscle at the bottom of the rectum, um, which is a sphincter, which is controls whether or not you go to the bathroom and keeps all that in. It's would be really awkward if it didn't, because otherwise, it would be in your pants all the time. So that would be bad. Um, let's talk a little bit about the other organs: the liver, the pancreas, and the gallbladder. Each one of these is an organ that is responsible for producing or storing, in the case of the gallbladder, digestive enzymes and fluids that help to remove the nutrients from the food that you've ingested. Pancreas actually is a multifunctional organ. It also is really, really important in terms of the endocrine system, but it produces an enzyme, a fluid that neutralizes the acidity of the stomach acid, which helps the bile do its job, which is used to break down fatty acids. So it acts as a surfactant that breaks down any kind of fats that are left in the food as it comes through the stomach. And then bile, which is produced by the liver, stored in the gallbladder, is the enzyme that, well, the combination of enzymes that helps to break down the fats left in our food. The appendix is an interesting thing. It sits at the bottom of the right side of our abdomen and doesn't really do a lot for us now. It's what we consider a vestigial organ. Um, Over time, it has evolved and shrunk in size because we don't use it so much. Um, it can be dangerous because it can get infected. Bacteria can actually pile up in the appendix, and they'll end up causing an infection throughout the abdomen, which can be deadly if you're not careful. Um, but there are some organisms that use the appendix still. It helps them to digest cellulose, which is an enzyme that is commonly seen in plants, in their cell membranes. There's also some discussion that the appendix is or was once used as a form of immune system organ that would house bacteria that would help us if we ingested rotten meat or something along those lines. So that's it for this episode. Hopefully, everybody got something out of this, and I will talk to you all next time.